Hello, welcome to today's video. Let's dive into round 6 of the Women's Candidates Tournament in Toronto, Canada, and follow the game between Nurgyul Salimova and Alexandra Goryachkina. These two players played probably the most important match in women's chess in 2023, which was the final of the World Cup, where Alexandra Goryachkina managed to win against Nurgyul Salimova, but this was also the tournament that made Salimova a star and a household name for chess. So, let's see what Salimova had prepared as prep with white against her more titled opponent, and we look at the board now. d4, d5, Nurgyul started with a Catalan, the same opening that she won in round 4 against Humpy Cunero. So let's see how Goryachkina had prepared to respond. In this move on move 5, Humpy went quite crazy with an attack straight with knight e4, a very rare move that Nurgyul managed to punish with a win. So Goryachkina chooses to play a lot safer, and instead of that, instead of going knight e4, Goryachkina went for castle, which is the much more common line and much more solid. The two players developed quite standardly from here on. After this position has been played many times in the database, there are over thousands of games on this, even on the highest level. So the next few moves are very well known and very well prepared by both players. And we reach a position around move 19 that I wanted to discuss with you. So what we see here is that Nurgyul has almost completed her development, and both sides have fairly equal chances. As you can see by the bar on the left hand side, the computer says 0-0, so the game is completely equal, so it is all to play for at this moment. And Nurgyul has managed to achieve all of her objectives so far in the game. The question is how to continue. So for today's video, this is the moment that I wanted to challenge viewers and see what is the best move here for white. So pause the screen and have a think, what would you play next as white? Alright, well, if you chose e4, that is the correct move. There is many other moves that keep the position equal, but this was the move that white, all of its moves before that, have been in order to be able to make this move e4 and really challenge the center. Notice that if you played e4, you cannot directly be captured because you would open this diagonal and basically lose the game. The queen and knight together would attack f7 and would make the position extremely unpleasant for black, which at the top level would probably equal to a very quick loss. Instead though, Nurgyul didn't play this move, which was to me very surprising because her whole development was begging for this move to be played. That's why she played all these moves before, but she wanted to, I guess, find a different plan and saw some other alternatives that she seemed are better or equal to playing e4 at this moment. So she went with bishop to h3, which again is not a bad move, but it was just very counterintuitive to what the position demanded. Nonetheless, she puts the bishop on this very good diagonal and the game goes on. We have a bit of piece reshuffling from both players now, and Nurgyul, basically her whole idea is to attack on the queen side. All of her pieces are focusing on that and are aiming towards the queen side. She wants to get a domination there and be able to exchange favorably pawns on the queen side, and really that's how she is planning to win the game. On the other side, what Goryachkina is doing is solidifying her pieces and starting an attack, launching an attack of her own on the king side where Nurgyul's king is. And as we see, since the position that I told you, can you find e4, 8 moves have passed, and if we look at Nurgyul's position compared to several moves ago, none of her pawns have moved, and also all of her pieces are on worse squares compared to where they were before. Notice where these 3 pieces are, and if we look at move 19, we see that they are actually, the bishop is in the same place and the other 2 pieces are in a more attacking position if she would have been to play e4. So she has kind of not really lost the game, but wasted a lot of moves to reshuffle and to prepare an attack that simply doesn't work, unfortunately. Obviously, in real time, she probably didn't know that. But what Goryachkina has done in the meantime is attack on the king side, and finally Nurgyul breaks off with a pawn. But again, she probably thinks this attack on the queen side will be good, and the computer really wants to refute that by saying Goryachkina is already more than a pawn and a half up. And as the attack continues, Nurgyul basically is trying to do something that we know with the benefit of analysis that doesn't work. So the game continues. And what is good about Nurgyul's position is that she manages to kind of more or less equalize the position. So we jump to move 40, where another critical position arises. As you can see, most of the pieces have been exchanged, and and here black basically tries to launch an attack on Nurgyul. And the question here again is what to do in order to keep defending. So if we pause for a second, look, 40 moves have passed, which means also the players have gained 30 extra minutes on the clock that they can use to think a bit harder about the endgame. We have black leading by a pawn, and this pawn is the c pawn, which is a pawn that could queen. There are no opposing pawns, so it's a passed pawn that cannot be stopped by white's pawns. So what Nurgyul really should be trying to doing is keep that pawn at bay with rook to c7. It's always a good idea to put your rook behind pawns when they're advancing towards your own territory and trying to promote. But at the same time, all of her other pieces are quite stuck at the moment. The bishop has a very important role of guarding this e4 square from the knight, and the king itself is kind of finding it hard to break out, being restricted by pawns, by the knight and by the rook together. So overall, Nurgyul is definitely in a more passive position and needs to defend against the advances of the c-pawn. So her next move is rook to b6, which is not ideal. What she really should be doing is attack this pawn not from the side but from the back, and after Goryachkina defends her pawn with rook to c1, allowing it to progress further if she is given the opportunity, Nurgyul plays king to g3. So it's very difficult to see from here how she can make progress. Again, what she should be doing is get her rook here, so that eventually it could go and attack the pawn from behind, also keep the king a little bit at bay and put some pressure on all of the files, being able to put a rook behind any of Goryachkina's pawns. Instead, she tries to activate her king, which goes to h4, and things are starting to look even better for Goryachkina, who plays a normal move, attacks the pawn and brings Nurgyul's king back to g3 to defend this pawn on f2. And now again, for some reason Nurgyul, I'm sure she saw it, because I mean, it's a very basic thing to know where to put your rooks under the behind the pawns, but it seems that she just didn't like that plan. Maybe she saw some other ways that her rook will be kicked out of that square or something like that, and she maybe didn't want to tie her only active piece to one specific job, which is guarding the pawn. So she's trying to use her rook in a more active way, and instead of here playing rook to b7 or rook to b8 check and putting her rook behind the pawn, so these will be the squares to play next move in order to after that go either to c8 or c7. She decides to activate her rook by switching it around and going back. And again, this is another thing that the computer does not particularly like. So from now on, it's not like the game is completely lost, but it's definitely Goryachkina in the driving scene, and Nurgyul really needs to start dealing with the dangers that she has allowed Goryachkina to have a few free moves in order to prepare, since the rook never went where it should go, which is on the c file towards the back of it. So now we have the black king being activated, and now we have check, but ideally this king should have not been so close to the center by the time Nurgyul checks. Again, she does not play rook to c7, now it makes a bit less sense anyways. She wants to free that space for the bishop in order to be able to put the king on f3, which is where it goes now, being checked and going to f3. And now, after f5 from Goryachkina, one of the best moves in the position and definitely the one that keeps the most attacking chances, Nurgyul really is facing a tough decision. Third and last time she has an opportunity to play rook to c7 and at least guard the pawn, and notice that with this rook all these pawns are advanced, so the rook can swing behind, make threats here, go back to c7, so it could be a very active piece where it is. So obviously now it cannot go to g7, but if the knight moves in a different position, the rook has scope to annoy black and really prevent black from attacking. But unfortunately instead Nurgyul chooses for the last time to ignore, and this is the fatal blow to her position, because she tries to activate the bishop from the side and probably wants to create some threats together with the bishop and the rook from behind in order to deal with the pawns on the king side, but unfortunately that's not where the big problem is. The big problem is the c pawn, and black takes advantage of that with only two moves. So Goryachkina rotates her knight first to f6, but this is just a pivot to go to the best square for the knight in this game, which is e4, and there is nothing that can be done from this position in order to stop that. As you can see, Nurgyul is desperately now trying to bring the rook into the game, because once the knight comes on e4, there is a deadly attack that literally is made in one move if you don't deal with it, which is to attack the f2 pawn, a pawn that is on a dark square. All of Nurgyul's pawns are on dark squares and very fixed, so they can't move and they cannot work together with her own bishop. So Of course, Goryachkina finds the best move. That was her whole plan, to get her knight to this really good place where it cannot be kicked out of. And now Nurgyul gives a check and desperately goes back in order to save mate in 1. But all her pieces are committed on the king side, which allows the pawn to start advancing. So there is not much that she can do. All of her pieces are fixed. Out of 6 pieces that she has, only 1 can work. It is the rook, and it needs to pay the heavy price of it being the piece being sacrificed for the c-pawn, which is an instant loss. So instead Nurgyul tried to grab a couple of pawns with it, but on move 60, when it was inevitable that the c-pawn will queen, Nurgyul resigned. So quite disappointing outcome of the game. I don't think Nurgyul necessarily played bad or anything, but it was clear that in the end game she just did not want to commit 1 rook to defend the pawn, but she really had to, and with perfect play she probably was going to be able to save a draw, or at least test Goryachkina to the limits and hopefully induce mistakes. Doesn't matter. One of the players that has a positive score against Nurgyul, a very strong player, Goryachkina, and we'll see what Nurgyul does tonight in the final round of the first half of the tournament against Katerina Lagno. So let's look out for this game, and good luck to Nurgyul in it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to subscribe and do all the algorithm things for the channel. And let me know what you thought about this game, which I would summarize as a nearly perfect game from black, and a game where white achieved a great position on move 19, but did not commit to a clear attack, and how to actually develop, wasting a few development moves and ultimately allowing black to really expand and put her under pressure. That was not easy to deal with. Thank you, and bye-bye.